Welcome to another episode of The Rundown. I'm Sunny Galt. I'm a messenger with United Network News. UNN is the official news channel for CARE, which stands for the Center for Amity and Restoration of Earth. And what we talk about, primarily on our newscast, is the real news. We want to tell you what's really happening, not just in your own communities, in your state, in your country, in the world, and then even beyond our planet, which I know is a really big concept. Not a lot of people talking about that with any real credibility, and we hope to become the first source to do that because there's a lot of stuff that's happening, and not all of it is happening on our planet right now. There's some really cool things going on, but everything we tell you is real. There is no fake, you've heard of fake news. No fake news on this podcast, no fake news on our newscast. So we do have a newscast that we release through our online distribution platform, and that comes out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So if you guys would like to check that out, which is the more complete version of some of the things we're going to talk about today, you can visit unitednetwork.tv. On this podcast, we highlight some of the stories we cover on the newscast, and it's kind of an overview. So this is a great show to listen to if you weren't able to actually watch the full newscast. Maybe you're not subscribing, you're not a member to be able to watch the full newscast. And or if you have somebody special in your life, so it could be a loved one, a friend, somebody that is kind of on the verge of waking up, right? They see that the world is not what they thought it was, what we've been told our entire lives. Oh, this is how things are set up, and this is how the government runs, and this is how the financial system runs, and this is how religion works. We've been lied to about pretty much everything, and more people are starting to wake up to this fact. And there's not a lot of resources they can trust. A lot of people, once they figure out that mainstream media is, not really giving them the truth, then they'll go over to the alternative media. But the problem is, and we talk about this a lot on this podcast, is it's the same people running both shows. The same content that is getting passed down through the alternative media is the same stuff, maybe not the same exact stories, but it's coming from the same source of people that are sending stuff down to the mainstream media. See, their goal is to control everything. And that includes the controlled opposition. If you haven't heard of that term before, it's this idea, and it's real, that, there's like a two-party system. Like here in the U.S., we've got a two-party system, right? We've got Republicans and Democrats, and if you're anything but that, no one really pays attention. And that's so they can control things too. It's like the Republicans have, whatever they believe. The Democrats have what they believe. They all stick to the same talking points. But no one ever tells you it's the same people running the show at the top. And the idea is to make people think that we're different when we're really not. Most humans want the same thing in life. We may have different ideas on how to get there, but usually those ideas are filtered through this matrix system that we've been living in our entire lives. So we really don't know any better. But most humans want to do good. They want to have a nice life. They want to provide for their families. They care about their children, But we've been made to believe that life isn't really what it is. And so we hope to break that down for you through our newscasts and also through this podcast. And the way we do that is we have access to the highest security clearance on the planet. Now, believe it or not, all countries kind of tap into the same system, if you will. And we've got access, like literally the very top. No one has higher access than us, okay? Not necessarily UNN, it's more of CARE, the Center for Amity and Restoration of Earth. But we are, like I said earlier, the official news channel for CARE. So we get that information and we present that information to you. So if you have friends and family that are kind of on that cusp, that are like, something weird's going on, and they just don't know where to turn to next, please don't send them in the direction of alternative media or mainstream media. I doubt you do that. But this is a place where we hope to explain things a little bit more, get them thinking about the headlines that are coming out and why are certain stories being run, and then also give you access to information you simply won't find anywhere else. And to be honest, some of this information is going to be very surprising. If you fall into that category of someone sent you this podcast and you're like, what in the world is this? Some of the stuff we're going to say is going to seem like it's, from some Star Trek movie or, insert science fiction movie name here. And they disclose a lot of stuff through movies. It's really strange. In fact, one of the things we're going to talk about in the World Situation Report comes from a movie. You can actually kind of see them disclosing information in movies, and we'll get into why they do that in just a bit. But it can kind of seem overwhelming. It could kind of seem science fiction-y, and I promise you this information is real. And I do encourage you guys to do your own research. Don't just believe something that I say or Kim says in the World Situation Report or what anybody says, someone on mainstream or alternative media. Don't just believe it because someone has a podcast or a TV show, radio show. They happen to have a microphone in front of them. Don't believe them because they have that. You could have a microphone in front. Your grandmother could have a microphone in front of her. So that's not a big deal. Okay, we have to start using our own intuition, We have to discern information, and that's going to become easier and easier for us to do because humanity has a natural lie detector built into us. It's been suppressed for a while, but we do have the ability to do that. So I want you guys to all think critically about any information that's presented to you and ask yourself questions. And those questions should lead you in different directions and start doing your own research. Okay? All right, so do I have any announcements? There's some stuff that we're going to talk about after the World Situation Report that's kind of in the announcements category, but I'm going to hold off on that. I do want to clarify something, and we did this in the newscast for today, for Friday, but I wanted to say it on the podcast. So we said, I believe it was last week, we said we are changing the format of the news, the way we've been doing the news, especially the world stories, which we'll get to in just a bit. And we're not going to focus on the government anymore. And long story short, if you haven't heard our newscast before, this is going to be new information. But long story short, federal government is dying, okay? We estimate 6 months or less, there are going to be 0 federal governments on this planet. And there's a kind of lengthy explanation why. But if you continue to listen to this podcast, you'll start to see why this is happening. But we have tried to work with governments and tried to get them to stop harming humanity, and they're not stopping. They are just literally running themselves off a cliff. So we just washed our hands of that. And that is starting to impact our newscast. We are not doing stories just about what some government official says. I don't care and you shouldn't either. You should not care what a government official says unless there's some sort of law or something that's being passed that's going to impact you personally. Who cares what they think otherwise? If you really start to look at these headlines out there, a lot of it is just fear porn. Some politician just wants to say something stupid about another country. Why do we care about that? We should care what impacts our daily lives. And those are the type of stories that we are going to be talking about on the news. I think there was a little bit of confusion I could tell on the Telegram threads, which I'll tell you about at the end of the newscast if you want access to those. But there was some confusion about, hey, you're still talking about governments. Well, we're going to do that in the situation report. And even today, we've got some stuff that we're going to mention. So just wanted to, clarify that a little bit for everyone. And now let's get to the rundown. Here's the rundown for Friday, September 15th. 2023. Our field messengers are really what the news is all about because we believe that the news has to change. We have to go, again, basically what I said in the beginning, from people, talking heads, people that are being flown to locations that they've never been before, claiming to tell you the story of what's happening in that community. Hey guys, I was originally part of that group. I worked for regular TV stations, and while I can't remember an instance where I was flown to a different location, I would come into these cities and have no idea really what was behind the topics that the city was dealing with. So why are we doing that? Why aren't the citizens, why aren't the people talking about the issues? And that's what our field messenger system, I don't know if that's the right word. Our program, I don't like the word program either. We've been programmed for far too long. That's what our field messengers are all about. They submit reports based on what's happening in their community. And sometimes it's a little more hard-hitting. We've talked about, child trafficking and things like that. We've also been more lighthearted and talked about restoration topics involving, sewage and the area where people live. We've covered festivals and different things like that. But the intent behind this is to make the world a little bit smaller and to cut out the middleman, aka the reporters that really, may have a good heart in all this. It's just the setup is wrong. That you can't, as one person, you can't be traveling around the world and think you're doing a really good job with all the stories that you're doing because you simply don't have the context. So that's what our field messenger reports are all about. Real people reporting on events that are happening in their area. And we have a couple reports in today's newscast. The first one is about, we're calling it historical carousel. Now, if you Google that or whatever search engine you want to use, maybe not Google, if you search for that, type in Cori, Italy, Cori, Italy. Now, I think these are fascinating. This is a festival that Maya, one of our field messengers, reports on. And it celebrates, it's kind of part religious and a historical event, but it's really great. So people are walking through these small corridors. And I don't know about you, but I love the Italian, landscape, if that's the right word, but like how the buildings are stone and then there's like cobblestone on the streets and then they've got plants. The whole decor. Like if I could have a house that is all Mediterranean, that's what I would do. That's my favorite style. So there's just so much beauty in seeing this area of the world. But there's basically, I don't know if you want to call it a festival, parade. They're walking down the streets and they're in this, it looks like a Renaissance kind of period, all these, fancy clothes. And it's kind of a throwback to the past. And it's really fun to see how, different areas of the world celebrate different things. And so you can check that one out. The other field messenger report that we have is from Greg in South Africa. And we call this Divine Beings of Light. And this is literally Greg talking into the camera, telling people about how important they are. And we forget that a lot. And I know it seems like a really simple story, and quite frankly, it is. But we need to be reminded because everything else that's coming at us in life is telling us the exact opposite. But the truth is that you are a beautiful being of light, capable of incredible things that we are just now relearning because I think our soul, our spirit has known this all along. But like I said, we've been given all these lies throughout, the millennia. And so Greg has a really beautiful message for everyone. And so you can check both of those out. On UnitedNetwork.news, we were posting all of the field messenger reports, and I just found out that we're a little bit behind. So if you want to watch these particular stories, the best thing for you to do is go to our Telegram channel, which I'll tell you about at the end of today's episode. It's also in the description for the episode. But if you want to find out about how you can become a field messenger, which is really easy to do, anybody can do this. But sometimes people want a little more guidance as they get started. And so we have some more information on UnitedNetwork.news. There's a whole section for field messengers. You can check it out there. All right, in our world news, we have a few stories we're going to go over today. The first is Ukraine draft dodgers. So I don't know if you know this, but Ukraine has essentially instilled the draft in their country. They are trying to get people to go to war that have not signed up to go to war. So they are just pulling from the general population. And this is not going over too well. In fact, we are seeing a lot of people leave the country, at least try to leave the country and go into neighboring countries to avoid this. And the interesting thing about this story is that there are several EU countries who have said they are not going to help Ukraine with people that are dodging the draft. So if they come into their country, too bad, so sad, they're staying, which I think is very interesting because you're starting to see countries really put their foot down when it comes to Ukraine. Now, a lot of these countries have their own laws that says that draft dodging is not a crime, which is why, they're telling Ukraine, listen, it's not a crime here. We don't follow your rules. So, they have a safe haven. The other thing I thought was interesting about this story, and I didn't realize this before, but Ukraine is not just selecting healthy men and women to go into the draft. They are taking people with mental disorders, chronic illnesses, tuberculosis, and HIV, which just shows you they don't care at all about their people. And this is important for everyone to know, especially if you have friends and loved ones that are still out there waving their Ukrainian flag because that's what Congress told you to do. We have been led to believe that this is a David versus Goliath situation, and not so much, not so innocent. And it's refreshing to see some of these other EU countries take a stand. So that's our first story. The second one I want to tell you about is a huge strike that started here in the U.S. with the United Auto Workers Union. And this involves workers for Ford, GMC, and Jeep. And the workers are basically saying, we're not being paid enough. The people at the top are making all of the money. I mean, this is a metaphor for what's been happening in our whole world, right? The elite get more and more wealthy. We get poorer and poorer from taxes and, all these crazy laws and things that we've got to do to comply with governments. So this is kind of like on a micro level, and you're going to see more and more of this. You're going to see more people start to stand up. And it's hard for people to necessarily stand up to the government all the time, but it's much easier for you to stand up against your employer. And that's what we're seeing here. So basically, the Ford, GMC, and Jeep are willing to pay a 20% wage increase, but the union wants more than that. And they also want additional hikes throughout the contract's life because, honestly, these workers are very concerned. They're concerned about their job loss or plant closure, so their whole place closing down. And the reason they're concerned about that is A, the economy in general, but B, there's this huge push for electric vehicles. And electric vehicles actually require less labor. So they could be out of job if all of these cars, and don't get me started on why electric vehicles are not the way to go. But let's just say enough people start believing that narrative, you are going to be laying off huge amounts of people. Now, if that was actually what's best for society, then we would find other ways to help the people, because this is going to happen as part of the restoration. There's going to be industries that need to be phased out, but you have to consider the people involved before you phase things out, because people would just lose their jobs. We cannot do that. But I guarantee the people that are pushing the electric vehicles have no plan for what's going to happen to the people that lose their jobs because they're, focused on more gas-powered vehicles. So obviously the workers are concerned and they want more money. They want more money up front. And I get that. It makes a ton of sense to me. And the third story, our world story we're going to talk about is something that probably most of you know, but we decided to report on it today just to remind everybody. And that is, the story is about how the West is influencing other nations to start to eat more and more unhealthy snacks. And this is kind of having like a ripple effect. And I know it's kind of like the joke, right, that Americans are like fat and they're lazy and they just stuff Cheetos in their mouth like every day. And some people probably do, like I understand the stereotype, but we have to be more and more mindful of what we are putting in our mouths, whether you live in the United States or you live on the other side of the world. The truth is that our food has been poisoned in so many different ways. And we have to stop eating the poison. I mean, that's the bottom line. And obviously the West is having an influence of what's happening in other countries, but we've got to stop this. And we have to turn back to healthy meals and healthy eating options, because this snack food stuff, replacing a meal with some sort of snack. I mean, here's the big picture here. You've heard the saying, food is fuel. So if you aren't getting good fuel in your body, you can't be very productive, right? You can't restore the planet as well as you could if you were eating greens and vegetables and, things like that we know that that's better for us. But it's not just eating vegetables, because a lot of our vegetables have pesticides. It's about eating as fresh, like farm to table, as possible, avoiding things in cans, which take out a lot of the nutrients. I mean, there's a whole, we have to totally re-educate ourselves. So what this story is talking about is how the West is influencing other places. And I've actually seen this. My husband watches a lot of YouTube, like travel shows and things like that. And I was shocked. There was this couple that was in Japan, and they did this whole show on how everything is now coming from a vending machine. Okay, let me tell you something. If stuff is coming from a vending machine, it is processed. It's probably really high in sugar and salt. In fact, this article was talking about like corn snacks, fried bread, things like that. And it may not be coming out of a vending machine. It may be like a night market or something like that, which is really popular in a lot of countries. And what this is leading to is some global health issues, obesity, non-communicable diseases. And so we have to course correct. And this is happening a lot in low-income areas where money is tight. Because, here's like, if you live here in the U.S., do you ever go to Dollar Tree, the store Dollar Tree? Okay, so I go there to buy certain things, but I have told my family, we are not buying anything that we put on our body or in our mouths. We don't buy anything from the Dollar Tree that does that, because if you look at what's in the packaging for this, honest to God, one time I went, and this is before I was awake. Okay, so I need to preface that. We bought cheese that came from the Dollar Tree. The cheese would not melt, you guys. Cheese is supposed to melt. Real cheese melts. This cheese would not melt. And for me, it was this huge wake-up call. So we have to really take care of our bodies, because we need our bodies to get through this next stage, to fight against, and I don't mean physically punching people and stuff like that, but spiritually, we are in a battle, and we have to take care of our bodies. And so this, again, was about how we're not doing such a good job of that. So we need to be mindful of that. And, maybe next time, you see a couple options, maybe choose the healthier option, or recommend, your friend choose the healthier option, because we have to take care of ourselves. All right. We take care of each other. This is a team effort. In today's World Situation Report, I kind of alluded to this earlier in the podcast, but we have an interesting conversation about something called the Loom of Fate. Now, if you haven't heard of that before, join the club, because we always talk about stuff that I've never heard of before. And Kimberly, too, until she finds it. So if you guys don't know who Kimberly is, Kimberly Gogan, she's from the Office of the Guardian. And this is a real position here on this planet. Now, again, for those of you who might be new, we're going to talk about some stuff that may seem a little out there, like do. But all this is real. This is very real. And we want you to be knowledgeable of the things that are happening that no one else is telling you about. So the Loom of Fate, this has been depicted in different movies and video games, things like that. But it actually is a loom, okay, like something, I would equate it to sewing, okay? One of those old machines that helps you put like rugs together and stuff. Now, it didn't actually use that kind of material, but it actually created messages in an unknown language. Like, you would not be able to read this. There's no text on this planet that would allow you to read this. This was supposed to be read by both upper astral as well as lower astral beings. So what do we mean when we say that? Okay, you've heard of angels and demons, right? You've heard of quote unquote aliens, but really there's not much difference between the two. When we talk about these things, we're really talking about different beings in different densities. So the higher the density you go, the less matter you have on your body, which people would equate more with like an angelic experience. Like angels, when I think of angels, they're almost translucent, right? Well, they're closer to the ninth density where God or source exists. Now you have the opposite happening. So if you go with your lower astral beings, you are progressively, the further and further down you go, the beings are going to become less and less dense. So They may look like black smoke or something like that. So this device here was meant to be read by both of those types of beings, probably more in the higher and the lower dimensions. And the whole idea was to keep the earth in balance. So instructions would come out about how to keep the earth in balance. What I mean by that is the earth was supposed to maintain this balance between the dark and the light. The problem is the dark pretty much took over and didn't play nice. That's the most simple way I can explain this. And they've been trying to control things ever since. Now, this loom was used once a year to determine the fate of the entire planet for the upcoming year. So, the planet is at this stage. We need to add more light. So funding and different things, could come from these instructions that these beings would get. By the way, this has not been used in a very long time, for the last 7 or so years. And that's a long time considering how much has happened in those last 7 years. But this was literally hanging out in New York City in the garment district, which I find really funny because this is what they do. They kind of put things out there in broad daylight and no one thinks anything of it. Yet it was so important to this planet at one time. So anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about the Loom of Fate. Kimberly's going to join us. So here's a section of that conversation from Friday's World Situation Report.
All right, so today we're going to talk about the Loom of Fate, which is a real thing. It's depicted in a lot of video games, those types of things, but it is something that is not from here, and it exists in New York, and it was utilized once a year to determine the fate of, I guess you would say, Earth for the next upcoming year.
Okay.
Now, originally, it was meant to be read by what we call the angels and the demons, so lower astral beings and upper astral beings, and it was supposed to maintain balance on the planet. That's what it was for. So it would. Not it of itself, I should say, but there were other mechanisms in place, kind of like the things we talked about on Wednesday, that would actually monitor the amount of light and darkness on this planet. And when things would get out of balance, then the team that would need, so in other words, if we were too dark, then monetary assistance and other things would go to the light. And conversely speaking, if we got too light, then monetary assistance and so on and so forth would go to the dark. And then the information would be passed down to eventually people that we still have left on this planet. The language of the loom, and I'm saying this for a reason because there's a bunch of wing nuts that were standing at it this morning, so I thought I'd tell you about that. The language of the loom is not in a language that exists on planet Earth. So the way that it kind of worked was that there would be a coding to the loom, and the coding on the loom would be read, and then it would translate. You see those spy movies where they get like dots and dashes and numbers and letters, and then they've got to kind of use a cipher and put it together, and they'll get the instructions. It's kind of similar to that, but it's written in a language that's very, very old, the first language ever, and it's mainly based on frequency. It's not something that these guys could have translated even if a message came through, which it has not for the last 7 or so years anyway. And I want to say probably a few thousand years ago, it was manipulated. So there was a program put in place by others, not by humans, that had manipulated it to, let's just say, register the amount of darkness required during the age of darkness. So we were pretty much always living in a dark time. Therefore, let's call them the descendants of fallen angels or descendants of demons would be the ones that would receive money, and they would receive orders and instructions eventually passed down. So it's interesting. There is, to some degree, a depiction of this loom in a couple of video games, I know, but there's also you can kind of see what it does in the movie Wanted. It's an old movie from 2008. The movie itself is about some assassins or something, and they get orders from the loom. I think we've got a clip of that, if you want to play that. But these are not actual fabrics, so it's not depicted correctly. It's not actual fabric. It's a filament, and it's made of a specific crystalline material that allows for the metamaterials that the loom is actually made of to conduct the information from something that was in the moon and something that was in Saturn, and eventually from the lower astral. You would have had a minimum of 3 to 9 lower astral beings or fallen angels that would have come up through the Diged Pillar on 33 Thomas Street, and they would have come on this day, which is New Year's Day for the dark. Also happens to be Rosh Hashanah, so kind of interesting there. And they would then read the information because it's written in their language, not ours, not in any language we would know. And no Sumerian texts and no Vedic texts or anything like that are actually going to help you read this. But the machine did, to some degree, kind of turn on today. There were no instructions coming out of it, but they were all excited, thinking they were now in charge, so they were going to get the instructions, which even if they had completed the cipher and decoded it, and you're going to need more than a super secret decoder ring to get that done. And if you had, it would have been a jumble mess of letters and all kinds of things that you wouldn't have been able to read anyway. So it's just an interesting, just when you think this world cannot get any weirder, there you go. And this thing is actually in the garment district of New York. How's that for funny?
Oh, wow. So were they trying to kind of disguise it, like hid it in plain sight?
I guess so. I don't know where it was originally, but that's where we found it this morning. So very interesting, how they tell you in movies what's really happening. So they're, like I said, without people to arrive to read it for you, you wouldn't have gotten anywhere anyway. You would have needed someone who actually speaks that language and actually understands it in order to translate it for you. And since I'm probably one of the few people that that could do that for you, that would be a no from me.
Yeah, and a no from me too, and probably a no for all of you, because the last thing that we want are these people who have been following this plan that's been passed down for thousands and thousands of years. We don't want to give them any ideas that this plan could actually work. And anytime they see a flare up here or this kind of turns on, but really doesn't do, what they think it's going to do, it gives them hope. And that's the last thing that we want, because we want to move forward with the restoration plan. And really, this is all about money. This is why the federal governments are going to collapse, because they have no money. And so they're trying to get money. And because we're not going to give it to them, it's not going to come from the global repository, then they are trying to create their own money. It's like Monopoly time, and everybody creates their own money, and, we're going to pass this off as real. But I have another soundbite that I want to play for you guys, because it provides more perspective on how money actually comes into the financial system. Because regardless of what your history book told you or whatever you learned, you've ever been to, I live in the U.S. and I've been to one of the U.S. mints where I see them printing off money. This is not how I thought it worked. But how money comes into the financial system is completely different. And Kim has a really good explanation of how this happens. And this is going to explain why they can't just print off paper money and think that it's going to work.
The source of my frustration this morning was I was actually getting yelled at for not being a good patriot and stopping them.
Who was yelling? Who was doing the yelling?
Some people in and around the Treasury Department. were yelling at me because I am not a good patriot. So I listed the laundry list of things I've done for the United States and for other countries in a very, let's just say, strong and loud manner.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, just because they come up with some harebrained idea, which has been done over and over and over again, doesn't mean, I'm not involved. I am not involved with your crazy idea. I'm watching it happen, but it has nothing to do with me anymore. You don't want our money. You don't want to do business with us. And by that, I mean, you would like to steal money from us. You would like to steal my system. You would like to steal a lot of things from me, but you don't want to actually do business.
Right.
Business implies one person is providing a service and the other person is paying for said service or said goods or whatever it is. And then in a financially sound manner, their job is to make sure that the economy runs properly. Like, that's what they're supposed to do. But that's not what people do. So here is the harebrained scam idea that blew up yesterday. Mm-hmm. So they decided, now the Treasury Department cannot legally and officially issue Treasury notes anymore. So they cannot actually put Treasury notes into the financial system at this moment in time. Technically, they're not even registered as a legal financial institution, government or otherwise, at the moment. Mm-hmm. And neither is the Fed. Neither is any other central bank for that matter. So, without firstly handling that issue, you can issue sunny IOUs on napkins and give those over to somebody. And if somebody's willing to buy your IOU, then great, right? All to the good. But you can't deposit the IOU in a bank. I mean, that's something maybe you do between friends. Well, to continue on with their, big meetings that they had, they came up with this great idea of issuing offline Treasury notes, similar to historical bonds that are not in the banking system either. There's no registration for those things. They were sealed up and done and dusted by the 80s. There's nothing left, no assets behind them, and yet people think they're going to cash them in for billions of dollars. And that's not the case. They are, wallpaper. They're very pretty. They're pretty wallpaper. They make some great wallpaper for an office, but that's about all they are. In their, it's just a part of history of something that used to exist and liens that used to exist that aren't there anymore. It'd be like looking at savings bonds from, 100 years ago or 200 years ago, something like that. They're nice to look at. They're kind of a collector's item, but you can't go and cash them in. So they decided to issue these offline treasuries, now wait for it, against the in-ground assets of basically the planet. Because we've never seen the Chinese do that at the Shanghai Exchange before. We also did not see it at least 300 times. I did not see that either. And then this is actually the funny part. So they did hand, hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars in these things out to various terrorist groups. They'd like to help start a war. They did give them to countries as well to calm the politicians down, people they owed money to, and the treasuries, aka the Jesuits behind them, thought they were going to run the world with these things. They were going to create possibly a completely different currency. It's a plan, complete with the electronic ink we discussed and all of this. Let's call them the fake money. We could try a new game other than Monopoly. How about Jesuit dollars?
I was thinking of another board game that uses money.
Yeah, I was trying to say it without the swear word. So let's call them the Jesuit monies. Okay, so they were going to issue Jesuit monies. Now they tried to issue these new monies, by going to the company in Switzerland there that manufactures most of the electronic ink for money all over the world. And they tried to issue a new type of ink with new allocation numbers in them and the whole thing. But they must have forgotten that they don't have the ability to approve that from the inside out. So in other words, the ink company cannot change anything within its closed loop that doesn't exist anymore that attaches to the financial system. Okay. They just think you enter these things and then everybody can just print money. But that's not actually the way it works. The way it works is you would actually have to get the information in the past. This is many years ago. Okay, you would have actually had to get the allocation numbers from the person in my chair, which would then have trickled down into the Fed, which then would have been lodged and registered in the financial system of the planet, which then would have matched what the ink company was putting in. Oh, and if no match, then no money. Yeah. So that's the way that it works, everyone. On the short bus of the Jesuits, that's the short bus people. So, people have said to me like, well, why do you make fun of them? I'm sorry. But when you're trying to achieve a lofty goal of world domination, you should actually understand how and what you need to dominate the world. Mm-hmm. See? Right? Like, how do you do it? I feel like I'm watching an episode of Pinky and the Brain.
I remember that show.
Yeah. And we're going to take over the world. What are we doing today, Pinky? We're taking over the world, So with that explanation, now that is why you have failed. Now, unbeknownst to them, the same thing goes for bonds and AB Corp in their ability to print them. You must also have a matching amount and allocation in that currency. Not only that, you also must have a registration for the debt, and to attach it to the entire in-ground asset base of the entire planet Earth, you must also be able to have permission to do that. Now, we have that all registered in the financial system because I had a conversation with myself and I said, self, shall we back, currencies with gold? And I said to myself, that's a good idea. And then we had this whole conversation that took place, and then we did it. Yeah. We didn't need a Jesuit. I didn't need a family. I didn't need a government. I didn't need anybody to do it because that's how it's always been done, unbeknownst to them. So not only did they do that, they actually convinced places like Berkshire Hathaway and BlackRock and what was the other one that they sold them to? Soros, all of their funds, and they took all their bagmen, put them all into a pile, and got them to buy these at 10 to 20 cents on the dollar, telling them they would be good on a day ending in Y. Soon, they said. Mm. Oh, yes. And that they would be able to cash out. What a good investment, good short-term investment, right? You're getting it for 10 cents on the dollar. You'll end up getting paid out that money plus interest when their harebrained scheme of printing the Jesuit money worked, whatever they were going to call it.
So that, Kim, was just an investment opportunity. They weren't it wasn't payment for something that those groups did. They were just dangling a carrot saying, hey, invest in
Well,
this.
they needed liquidity, right? That's the important thing here.
Okay.
So they sold a few, decent amount. They had conjured up enough money to make some payments that were way past due. And not a lot, but they paid it out in the form of salaries and, whatnot, stuff like that, things that are needed to keep the government running. Probably paid the Pentagon's payroll and those types of things. And so that money's kind of gone now. Like, you can't even get it back. Like, you can't take that money back. It's gone. And so when they all found out that these are fake treasury notes and that they're not actually registered in the financial system, therefore you can't call them an asset in your portfolio, now they're kind of in trouble, but it's worse than trouble. Because these companies, their only liquidity at this moment in time are things like pension funds and large pools of investment funds, which includes many consumers, these types of things. So they took that out and they put that in, allegedly, or tried to, and that didn't really work out very well for them. And now that is a major SEC violation. Huge violation right there.
But it's also, they don't follow the rules, period. Is that a serious threat?
Well, eventually that money's not coming back. They can't get it back. They can't replace all those consumer funds. So they're going to have to try to find some way to replace that, to fix it, because otherwise you're going to have, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of angry investors that want to know why they have no balance in their trading account now, or why their pension fund looks different. And you can probably fudge the numbers for a little while, but, I wish you all the best. I really do. And so they're all yelling at the Treasury Department starting about 3:00 yesterday afternoon Eastern time when they found out that they can't even put them in their portfolio.
Yeah. So as you guys can see, they are digging themselves a bigger and bigger hole. They're coming up with these crazy ideas. It's like they don't understand how the whole system works. So they're grabbing Band-Aids to help stop the bleeding. But really, this is a massive hemorrhage and they're going down and there's nothing they can do to stop it. And they don't usually understand the big picture, which is kind of the frustrating thing, is we're trying to educate and tell them about what's happening, but the people at the top just aren't listening. So there you go. They're going down with the ship. That's kind of the behind the scenes of what's happening here on this planet with the old financial system and what the people that used to be in charge, they're just grasping at straws at this point. Also, further in the situation report, which we're not going to play a soundbite for today, but we do discuss the United Nations General Assembly meeting that is coming up. Not that they actually make any decisions at that meeting, because they don't. They're all puppets. And the people that really make the decisions actually meet a couple weeks before. Those are the operatives that make the decisions. Now, no one reached out to Kim to ask questions or suggest plans for the future. So this is going to be a big nothing burger. I don't know what they're going to talk about at the UN General Assembly meeting, but it's just talking head. So really nothing to see here, folks. But if you want to hear some of the discussion that we have about that, you can listen to or actually watch the entire newscast. We also, and this is something I wanted to tease, it's kind of an announcement, but I said, I'll talk about it later. We have a new segment coming out that's going to be after the World Situation Report. I'm not sure if this is going to launch next week. It's going to launch when we have enough segments or enough videos, which is what I'm about to explain to you. But it's called Connect with Kim. Now, a lot of people have a lot of questions for Kim, and she's only one person, and she's doing a lot to help us in many different ways. But this is one way that we are hoping that you can ask Kim a question. And you do need to send in a video, it's 30 seconds or less, asking your question. Now, it's not guaranteed that it's going to play on the news. I want to be very clear about that, because we are expecting to get some people that are just complaining and whatever. But if it's a legit question, it doesn't just have to be news related. Maybe you're interested in something else about Kim. Her favorite meal that she makes. I don't know. She loves to cook. Whatever it is. Some can be fun. That's totally fine. Kim's going to go through the questions. We also have a team that's part of UNN that will, initially go through questions and hand them over to Kim. And if you decide to do a video and you're on camera, that's the other thing. You have to be on camera, ask your question, then it's your opportunity to do that. And for us to answer it on the news, and we may do some other things with it, because we know that this is just a very confusing time right now, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. And I do go through the Telegram groups and see the questions you guys are asking, and I do try to bring that into my conversations with Kim. But inevitably, I'm going to miss some stuff, right? So now you can get your questions answered. So if you want more information on that, you can go to our website, unitednetwork.news. We have a section called Become a Field Messenger, and it's a drop-down menu. So if you just kind of drop down the menu, you're going to see a section for submitting your videos to Kim so you can upload your video through the website. Okay? So we gave you a lot of information today. We mentioned a lot of different names and what people are doing. As I said at the beginning, do your research. Don't just think because we said it or whoever said it. Like, that's what they're counting on, okay? They actually have a whole method to their madness where they will select different people, mainstream media, alternative media people. I think it's 8. Maybe if you have 8 familiar faces tell you something, then you actually start to believe it. So don't feed them. Don't do what they want you to do. You do your own research. Go down some of those little rabbit holes, have an open mind, think critically. And I encourage you to share this podcast with someone you care about. This is a great, get your foot into the door of what's really happening in this world. And if you do want some more information and you want to subscribe and get the newscasts and all that good stuff, you do have to be a member, and there is a fee associated with that. But you can go to unitednetwork.tv. You get all of our newscasts, the complete world situation reports, as well as original series. And there's some really good health and wellness videos there too. So if that's your thing, we're putting out a lot of great content for you guys. You can also connect with us on Telegram. I will include the links in the episode description. There are 2 different channels and 1 Telegram group that I would encourage you all to join. One is called Care General Updates. So that's the Center for Amity and Restoration of Earth. A lot of comments go through there, not just our newscast, but ways to get involved, webinars we do, all that good stuff. Sometimes just straight messages from Kim if she wants to clarify something. We also have United Network News Channel, and that is not for discussion, but that's where all the links for our Field Messenger reports are going to be. So if you want to watch any of the Field Messenger reports I talked about earlier, you will find the link on this Telegram channel. So just look for United Network News Channel or look for the link below. And then also, if you're interested in becoming a field messenger, we have a special group for that. And we've got a production team in there who can answer all of your questions. And you're not doing this alone. We're here right there beside you, helping you every step of the way. This is The Rundown, and I'm Sunny Galt for United Network News, signing off.